Hello, hello.
Hello, hello, hello. Come around 2 weeks doesn't take long.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Juniper's Higher Education series. My name is Cottrell, and I am joined today with my good friend and esteemed colleague, Jamie Pitchforth, who is our head of education for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. How are you doing today, Jamie?
I am good. You are so kind. Thank you.
So, today we are talking about safety and security all across universities, which is still and will always be an important topic. So, folks, please be sure if you have any questions, comments, feedback, go ahead and fill them out in the chat window. And also be sure to let us know where you're tuning in from. We want to keep this conversation as open and collaborative as possible. Well, Jamie, so while we're it's an interesting time in the world right now because I think we are finally starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel around these COVID-19 restrictions. But as you know, education establishments are still facing the challenge of bringing students back to campus safely. And even further from that, what does the future look like around a potential hybrid or blended model? So what are you seeing from a, return to campus safely perspective? What are the top priorities of university leaders that you've been meeting with?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think around the world, and it doesn't really matter which country you come from, which continent you're located in, the university community are desperate to get students back to campus
Yeah.
and re-establish that connection. You know, my daughter, 18 years old, off to university very shortly. It's the idea of hybrid learning and spending, a larger volume of time at home, I say isolated. It's that doesn't appeal to that generation. It's the university experience as a whole. So being there, meeting new people, obviously education and research, but the whole social element that actually comes, with it. And for many, it's the first opportunity to, fly the nest and actually leave home and go into some, into that safe environment. And the universities are absolutely desperate for those, for those students to come back. Challenging times, and hopefully the worst is behind us now that the vaccinations are in full swing, and hopefully that's going to make a huge difference and a huge impact. But with COVID in the very first place, you never know what's around the corner, and I think those eventualities are something that the university community has to protect themselves against.
Yeah.
Looking at technology, and are there technologies out there that can help the universities provide that safe and secure environment, provide that mitigation of risk. Living here, I'm based in the UK, but I'm sure it's no different, across the various different countries that you as an audience are located in. But, I could cite a number of examples where a particular student or a small group of students were actually diagnosed and identified as COVID positive. And the impact to education, research, and that whole university life was dramatic. We saw instances with people like Manchester Metropolitan University banishing 1,700 students to their halls of residence because a small selection of students within that community were identified as COVID positive. So the impact is tremendous. So I think the reality is we're going to be living with COVID. So the question is, how do we mitigate the risk? How do we reduce the impact? That if there is a student identified COVID positive, how do we reduce that, make that a lesser impact to the whole of the university community? And for us, we're seeing customers, embracing technology to address that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think not just in a university setting, but around the world, and every country is no different. We're all being faced with this challenge of how do we safeguard ongoing safety and security for any constituents that are using the facilities. Now, we see a lot around contact tracing, and for Juniper, obviously, we've been a huge proponent of this type of solution, especially leveraging our network to carry on applications like this. what are you seeing, and how are you seeing that solution delivered, and what's the impact? What kind of capabilities does this technology allow for not just
Yeah.
safeguarding students, but also faculty, as well as that return back to campus starts to
Mm.
happen?
Yeah, and I think there's a very long list of growing applications, growing use cases, and positive outcomes that can be achieved from a select area of technology. That technology is location services. That ability to use BLE, so Bluetooth Low Energy, which is really the standard that Apple and Android have now adopted for location, is to use that to give accurate location data, i.e., being able to approximate somebody to within, let's say, 1 meter. And when you get that kind of accuracy, and you can start to do some clever things around dwell times. So if I'm a student within a university and I'm identified as COVID positive, being able to, once that's a known fact, being able to then look back and replay Jamie's footsteps. Where did Jamie go? Where's Jamie been over the last 2 weeks? Who has Jamie come in contact with, i.e. within that set vicinity, within that set distance? And when he did come in contact with that individual, how long was that engagement? So what was the dwell time of that? I.e., summary, did that put another individual at risk? And when we can get into an environment like we can use the technology to pinpoint potential people at risk, rather than banishing 1,700 people off to the halls of residence, we can pick that first tier. Then we can look at the second tier, i.e., who's at risk, who have they been in contact with? And you can end up with a much smaller group, maybe 20, 25 people that need to go into quarantine. So dramatically reducing the impact to the university and that whole community environment.
What's interesting is what you're describing, this journey mapping, if you will. It's not necessarily new for universities, right? I mean, even from my own experience, I've seen universities leverage this type of location services and the capabilities of, let's say, congestion alerting, even around physical threats on the campus, right? So if there's an active intruder or campus violence, being able to alert the proper emergency services, or navigate students, detour them on campus depending on these types of challenges. Now, with that type of structure in place, what other applications can you see or have you seen being used to help, using
Yeah,
the
again, very, very good question. From a university community and perspective, life security. Now, whether you're a professor and you're in a classroom, late into the evening, and you have a disgruntled, upset student that wants to challenge you, threatens you, having that ability to immediately seek help, and for help to know exactly where you are, what time of day, who's within the vicinity, identify a first responder. Often within these incidents, the difference between how long it takes somebody to arrive to deliver help can make a huge difference. So being able to have that, again, that location accuracy, identify that first responder, and make sure that we can reduce that time from that first responder getting to the incident, offering that help. So, I mean, that's just one example of it. But, female students walking around campus, maybe in the evening, you're in your halls of residence, you run out of milk, you need to, you've run out of supplies, you need to come across campus. It's particularly at certain times of the year when it's dark, some countries when, misty and not very nice at all, like UK. Being able to have that safety net for them, that ability to immediately reach out for help is really, really important. And what I'd like to say about that is it's also really important for a parent. So I said at the very beginning, I'm now looking, my daughter going off to Nottingham. That whole campus security, that campus safety piece is absolutely paramount. And if I can see that the university is embracing technology to provide greater safety measures, for my daughter or, for people's sons and daughters, it's a huge tick in the box. And that helps them with their recruitment. It helps them with their profile in the market. So it's a really big win-win.
Absolutely. I mean, as a female myself, I think back to my days in university, we didn't have any of these types of applications. And certainly, the long gone are the days of flip phones and things like that. But to be able to automate emergency service notifications and to have the immediate action taken with the right level of authority, I mean, it's absolutely critical.
And it actually goes a level deeper now, that with the integration into, the student app, that student could have, it depending on what kind of incident it is.
Yeah.
It could be violence against a member of staff. It could be that somebody within a classroom's had an asthma attack and collapsed. So being able to request the right kind of resource, i.e., it's a healthcare emergency. So you press the healthcare emergency button. If it's, very sadly, if it's an incident with a shooting or a stabbing or, a kidnap, something that is threatening life, then you have a different kind of response. And that is absolutely imperative to getting the right responder in the right place at the right time. And that saves lives.
It's interesting because we at Juniper, we talk a lot about creating a threat-aware network, right? To provide visibility across every user, application, endpoint device on the network. And that's great for a cyber strategy, especially for a university.
Absolutely.
Now we're actually talking about taking that same network and, again, giving it a dual purpose to not only drive the cyber strategy, but also using it to underpin that physical security and safety strategy for not just students, but I love that you mentioned faculty, because absolutely nowadays you need to make sure that you're solving for every user on campus, every person who is using the facilities. So I think that's really an important concept, and definitely something that should be part of the wider strategy for universities.
Yeah, and I think that, as we move into, well, not move, we're on a journey at the moment where every university is looking at this digitalization, this modernization, transformation. But when they do that and they look at, right, how do we lay the right foundation? Put that right infrastructure in place that's going to allow us to go on the journey and evolve, over the next 5 to 10 years. It's absolutely critical that you understand your stakeholders. So really looking out, talking and embracing with the estates department, with those responsible for safety and security, with those responsible for student services, with those responsible for, a whole plethora of different capabilities and competencies that actually benefit from a network. And I think that's a really good starting point, is to get those foundations in place and make sure that you understand the objectives and the capabilities that you need to deliver against.
And that's actually critical, right? It is creating that foundation, that infrastructure layer that can help deploy all of these different applications and all of these additional services. And I think being able to establish that is now more critical than ever, because it's not just here, we're going to set up Wi-Fi, we're going to provide brilliant connectivity. It's actually, we are going to safeguard our students. We're going to use location services to help navigate during a global pandemic. I mean, the list can go on.
No, and the list does go on, but I think there's a mindset within the community that has to change, and that is that the network is no longer just about connectivity. It's a strategic business asset, and it's a business enabler. And when the universities start to acknowledge and embrace those investments as that, they can start to release the power that comes with it. But it is definitely a mindset change from where many of the institutions, have been with their networks historically.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we only have 4 minutes left, and I'm going to ask a little bit of a personal question. So I'm going off script here, so forgive me.
Love it.
You mentioned your daughter going to university soon, and I think it's important right now that we're not just looking at this from a university decision maker, right, or even a technology decision maker, but as a concerned father. What is it that you look for as you're looking at universities and where you're going to send your daughter off to, and where she's going to potentially be living? I mean, what kind of security posture are you hoping for?
That's a fantastic question. I think first and foremost, there's two things that I would shout out that are, I say, my biggest concerns, things that I want to understand. One of them is health and well-being. Understanding not just the mechanisms, the reactive mechanisms that they have in place for those that sadly, struggle with health and well-being, But how do they integrate? So when my daughter actually arrives at university, how does the university help her adopt this new way of living? How do they help her, join clubs? How do they help with inclusion? And I think that, technology, mobile apps, location services, being aware of who's accessing what, when they're accessing it, and you can identify, through those profiles, those lonely students. And I think the key to it is being able to identify, a lonely student in a crowded room. And if you can identify that, then you've got some tools, you've got some capabilities to start delivering the right kind of support. So I think for me, IT and the IT strategy of a university, of how they're going to use it to empower and enable and support the student is probably my number one thing that I look for. And then with that, you've got obviously the security and what have you that come with it. Sadly, the quality of the courses and the teachers, in many ways for me as a parent will come second, but my daughter would look at that. That would be her first, right? And I have to sit behind her to make sure that, yes, in doing that, the environment's correct, it's a good culture, that she, it's a good fit, that she's going to succeed, and that's ultimately what this is all about. I need her to succeed. That's healthy.
She can feel safe, her home away from home,
Exactly that.
I think that's great feedback. And you used the term, was it life safety, life security?
Life security, yeah.
Yeah. What an interesting concept. We're moving from this, it's not just important, again, to have your cybersecurity posture safeguarded, but also to make sure that the physical safety of students, faculty, and all administration is also looked after. I think that's brilliant. Any closing thoughts, Jamie, before we close off?
I think that the university community needs to be applauded for how they've managed in such trying times to really start to transform. And I would say that that's the start of the journey, and it is a journey. And I think that the universities really need to, look hard in the mirror and accept that coming back as they were is not going to take them on the journey and take them where they need to be. So it's about transforming and doing things differently to get different results.
Absolutely. And I 100% agree on the accolades. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And I hope that you keep your eyes open for the next one. That will be next Wednesday with Mike and Lauren. Thank you, Jamie, as always, for your wealth of experience and your feedback and input. Look forward to talking to you again in the future.
I look forward to it. Thank you, everybody.